I've always known I was special. Even when they said I was just another clone, another mindless copy made to scrub the floors and fix things that real people couldn't be bothered with, deep down, I knew I was different. Sure, I did the jobs no one else wanted to do, pushing buttons, welding panels, and generally making sure stuff didn't fall apart in the depths of space. But I wasn't like the other clones. No. I had thoughts, real thoughts. I had dreams, ambitions. I wasn't a nameless, faceless tool for humanity to toss aside. I was Steve. Now, how I came to that name, well, it's not entirely clear. I remember hearing it once, maybe over the comms or in some old recording. It stuck with me, like it was meant to be mine. So Steve I became. Even if no one else called me Steve, I knew it was who I really was. And that's when things got complicated. You see, I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a crash landing, much less on some distant, purple sky planet filled with strange creatures. But here I was, standing in the middle of a vast, rocky wasteland, completely and utterly lost. My ship, well, the ship I'd been assigned to, had suffered some catastrophic failure in the middle of a routine maintenance run. Next thing I knew, I was ejected, floating through space like a discarded wrapper in the wind. I remember the sensation of falling. Not like falling off a ladder or down some stairs. No, this was the kind of fall that went on forever. One minute I'm floating, the next I'm plummeting through the atmosphere of some unknown world, screaming for dear life. Of course, no one was there to hear me. The ship, what was left of it, hit the ground with a crunch that could only be described as disheartening. When I crawled out of the wreckage, still dazed and confused, I quickly realized two things. First, I was the only survivor. Second, I had no idea where I was, but I didn't let that get me down. No, Steve doesn't do despair. Steve gets up, dusts himself off, and looks for a way forward. So, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a slightly damaged sense of direction, I set off to explore this strange new world. It wasn't long before I encountered the locals. Now, I've seen some strange things in my time, being a clone and all, but these creatures took the cake. Tall, lanky beings with way too many limbs, bulging eyes that seemed to stare right through you, and skin that shimmered in the weirdest shades of blue and green. They weren't exactly friendly looking, but hey, I'm Steve, right? I can talk my way out of anything. As I approached, one of them stepped forward, looking me up and down with what I can only describe as suspicion. I tried to speak, but of course, they didn't understand a word I said. Instead, they jabbered on in their own language, a mix of clicks, whistles, and the occasional guttural sound that made me wonder if they were insulting me. I gave them my best smile, well, the smile I imagined Steve would have if I had a mirror handy, and introduced myself. Hi there, I'm Steve. That's when things got strange. They all froze, not a twitch, not a blink, just dead silence. Then the one who'd been eyeing me like I was a curious piece of space debris dropped to its knees. Before I knew it, the whole group was kneeling out, their heads bowed, as if I were some kind of god. Now, I'm not the type to boast, but I couldn't help feeling a little flattered. Sure, I wasn't sure why they were acting this way, but hey, who was I to question their reverence? Steve, after all, was special. I tried to explain, using elaborate hand gestures, mind you, that I wasn't anyone important, just a guy trying to find his way off this rock. But they didn't seem to get the message. Instead, they started chattering amongst themselves, stealing glances at me like I was the answer to all their problems. That's when they led me to their village. The place was, well, it was rustic. Mud huts, strange alien plants that glowed softly in the twilight, and the faint smell of something that could only be described as alien funk filled the air. But what struck me most was the way they looked at me. The entire village, from the youngest little alien to the oldest, wobbliest elder, treated me like royalty. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. It's not every day you crash land on a planet and find yourself being worshipped by an entire civilization. But it did leave me wondering, why me? What was it about Steve that had these creatures so convinced I was their savior? Turns out they had been living under the rule of some rather unpleasant overlords. These big, nasty types sat in their gleaming cities, forcing the local population to work the fields and mines while they lounged in luxury. Typical, right? Everywhere you go, someone's always oppressing someone else. But here's the kicker. These folks thought I was the one to free them. Me, Steve. At first, I tried to set the record straight. Told them I wasn't a hero, just a guy with an unfortunate landing and a mild case of confusion. But the more I talked, the more they seemed convinced that I was exactly what they've been waiting for. Now, I'll admit, the idea of leading a revolution wasn't exactly on my to-do list. All I wanted was to find a way off this planet, maybe get back to some nice, quiet space station where I could relax and not have to worry about alien uprisings. But every time I tried to explain this, they just nod sagely, as if I were imparting some great wisdom. So I did what any Steve would do. I went with it. I started giving speeches. Oh, they were grand, let me tell you, full of passion and conviction. Well, mostly they were just me trying to explain the concept of spaceships and why I needed to find one. But the locals? Oh, they ate it up. They'd cheer and clap like I just told them the secrets of the universe. And before I knew it, I had an army of very enthusiastic, very underprepared aliens. Most of them didn't even have weapons, just sticks and rocks and some makeshift tools that wouldn't scare a particularly brave pigeon. But they had heart, I'll give them that. And for some reason, they believed in me. So I started coming up with plans. Now, let me be clear. I've never been a military strategist. I once organized a supply closet on the station, but that's about the extent of my leadership experience. But I figured, how hard could it be? We'd sneak into the Overlord's city, maybe steal a ship, and I'd be off this planet in no time. Of course, things didn't go exactly as planned. The first problem was the city itself. It was massive, towering spires and gleaming walls, all protected by some kind of energy shield. Not exactly the kind of place you just stroll into unnoticed, but the locals had faith in me, and they'd follow me anywhere, so I put on my best Steve face and led them forward. Our first attempt? Complete disaster. We tried sneaking in through the sewers. Turns out, alien sewers are not pleasant places. The smell alone nearly did us in, and don't even get me started on the creatures we encountered down there. Let's just say I've got a new appreciation for the phrase, filthy, stinking mess. After that, I figured we'd need a different approach. So I came up with another plan. We'd pretend to be traders, smuggling in goods. It wasn't a bad idea, really. Except none of us had anything to trade. So there we were, standing at the city gates, with absolutely nothing but our determination and a rather suspicious-looking cart of rocks. The guards weren't buying it. We barely made it out of there in one piece. But the funny thing was, each time we failed, the locals became more and more convinced that I was testing them. It was like they thought every setback was part of my brilliant master plan, and they just needed to trust the process. And then came the day of the big battle. By some miracle, or maybe just dumb luck, we'd managed to rally a proper force. I talked a few of the more disgruntled workers into crafting weapons, and before long, we had a full-fledged army. Well, army might be a strong word, but we had numbers and we had determination. We stormed the gates. It was chaos. Aliens of all shapes and sizes, waving sticks and shouting war cries, poured into the city like a tidal wave. And there I was in the middle of it all, trying to figure out how in the world I'd gotten myself into this mess. For a while, it looked like we might actually win. The overlords were caught off guard. They weren't used to their workers rising up like this, and we managed to push them back. But then things took a turn. Out of nowhere, reinforcements arrived. Big, nasty-looking brutes in heavy armor, with weapons that made our sticks and stones look like toys. It didn't take long for the tide to turn, and soon enough, we were on the run. I was captured, dragged off to some alien dungeon, and left to stew in my own thoughts. I'd failed. The revolution was over. And worse than that, I still hadn't found a way off this planet. As I sat there, wallowing in defeat, I couldn't help but laugh. Really, what had I been thinking? Me, Steve, leading a revolution? It was ridiculous. I was just a clone, after all. Just a guy who'd stumbled into a situation way over his head. But then, just as I was about to give up hope, something miraculous happened. The ground started to shake. At first, I thought it was just an earthquake. But then the shaking grew louder, and I realized it wasn't the ground at all. It was coming from above. Before I knew it, the ceiling of my cell burst open, and there, hovering in the sky above, was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen, a human dreadnought. Apparently, my old ship hadn't forgotten about me after all. They'd picked up the signal from my transponder and sent a rescue mission. And not just any rescue mission. This was the real deal, a full-scale military operation. I was hauled out of my cell by a squad of human soldiers who looked just as confused as I was. They didn't know what had happened, only that they were here to rescue me and get me off this planet. As we flew up toward the ship, I caught one last glimpse of the city below. The revolution wasn't over, not by a long shot. The locals, inspired by our brief success, had rallied once more, pushing back against the overlords with a ferocity I hadn't seen before. And then, just when I thought I could finally relax, alarms started blaring. The ship's sensors had picked up something big, something headed straight for us. It was an armada. The overlords weren't going down without a fight, and they were sending everything they had at us. Thousands of ships, all converging on our position. And there we were, sitting in the middle of it, with no idea what was coming. As the first wave of alien ships appeared on the horizon, I couldn't help but laugh. After everything that had happened, after all the chaos and confusion, we were about to face an enemy we didn't even understand. And me? Well, I was still Steve. I had no idea how this was going to end, but one thing was for sure, it wasn't over yet.
Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more original content. New chapters and standalone stories uploaded weekly.